Alright, so the brakes meta has not been doing as well as it normally does lately, and there's plenty of good reasons for that. It makes a lot of sense when you think about it, right? Hoyoverse planned for the follow-up and for the brakes metas to be very strong in the Penacony arc, and they have been making a shift towards erudition and remembrance now that we're in the Amphorus arc. It's a new meta, it's a new world, it makes a lot of sense. And don't get it twisted, okay? Like, I understand sometimes people get triggered by like the title or the thumbnail of a video without realizing the full scope of what the video was intending to be, and that's understandable to a degree. But listen, I fully understand that Rappa is an absolute beast right now, especially in Memory of Chaos 12 Side 1. She's absolutely obliterating the content as long as she fits the content, right? And I understand that Firefly still cooks, right? She still cooks. Like, she's not doing as well as she used to. She's not getting used as much as she used to. And I will talk about that. Well, I will go over the usage cases for a lot of these characters that are being used in Memory of Chaos. We'll take a look at their usage numbers and whatnot. And I'm fully aware that Ling Sha and Gallagher are still beast mode sustainability characters. I understand that HMC still has her place on the right teams. I understand that Fugue is an absolute monster of a support and doesn't even necessarily have to be supporting a specifically break team to perform well. And Boot Hill, trust me, bro, I haven't forgotten about the mans, okay? This dude is still popping off as long as he fits the content, as long as the enemies are physically weak, for example. I understand all of this. Anyways, I will be showing you guys some of the usage percentages of characters in Memory of Chaos given different parameters so that you guys can see what characters are currently being used right now and how well they're performing to some degree. But I wanted to talk about the break effect as far as the longevity of the meta is going forward, because some of you guys probably think this is just a Doom posting video or that like we're Doom posting out here. It's not the case, okay? This is just a discussion about this particular aspect of the game, because I actually want to talk about the fact that I don't think the break effect meta is necessarily actually suffering that much, and I don't think it's necessarily going to suffer that much going forward, depending on the situation, right? There are still places for most metas to exist in this game. Even DOT can still perform well despite what some of you guys might think, and you guys might be surprised in maybe a few months or so how DOT might be performing. Nudge, nudge, wink, wink. Now let's go ahead and get into this. And real quick, I just wanted to say that I'm sure you guys are fully aware, right, that breaks have always been a little bit niche, right? Because you're basically locked into whether you have the right damage type for the enemy's weakness type, right? Because if you can't get the break, you're not really going to deal a whole lot of damage. It's just like crit rate or crit damage based characters. If you don't get the crit damage doesn't matter, which is why you need to have a lot of crit rate so you can get your crit in the first place. It's similar to how breaks work. If you don't get the trigger for the effect never happens. So you really need it to work, otherwise you're basically hitting enemies like a wet noodle. And this next part's very important. In fact, it might be the most important part of the entire video, right? It's very interesting because the very thing that makes breaks niche is also the very thing that gives breaks longevity going forward, probably for the entire rest of the game's lifespan, right? Because you were always locked behind having to have the right elemental damage type for the enemies that you're going against. And a worry for a lot of players as far as breaks is concerned, what makes people feel like breaks days are numbered, is that you're going to come up against enemies like the Arumaton, elite enemy that only allows you to break it some of the time because of certain mechanics that the boss has, or simply a boss that doesn't even have a toughness bar at all for you to break in the first place. But are both sides of a stage going to have that? Probably not, right? It's only going to be like one of those enemies, meaning that one of your teams could be a very stacked break team, but the other team is not necessarily going to have to be a break team. That's how it's always been, right? There's been content like that where breaks is like, okay, I can't use breaks on that side, but I can use it on this side, right? And that's kind of the thing that's always hindered breaks, but it's also part of why it's always going to be relevant going forward, because despite the fact that certain content will not be very friendly to breaks, some of it always will be totally fine for you to use breaks. You just might be a little bit more limited in terms of what characters to have. That's one reason why Firefly is such a good break character because she has an ability that allows her to say, I don't care what the enemy weakness is, I'll still be able to break it somehow, right? She's also just a very strong character that got a lot of favoritism from the devs and was built in a way so that if you have a strong enough team, etc., you can still clear content with her, even if it wasn't necessarily ideally built for her to clear. So breaks will always be a bit limited, but not so limited that it's not viable all of the sudden, right? Certain content may be a bit more difficult for breaks because it wasn't necessarily designed for breaks, but it's not like you can't get the clear, right? I mean, bro, Firefly's usage case in the most recent Memory of Chaos dropped down a whole lot. However, she's still clearing even at E0 for a lot of people. She's not the best usage case for the current Memory of Chaos, but she still gets the job done anyway, and it's just further proof that despite the fact that the meta might change, there are certain situations where, breaks and other metas, of course, will still be viable. So it's not as bad of a situation as people like to make it out to be. Maybe breaks won't be literally the best meta going forward. That's obviously going to be the case, but my point is, it can still work, it's still viable, you shouldn't feel bad if you heavily invested into the breaks meta. It just might be a little bit more difficult to clear certain content with your break team. Like for example, Rappa's not going to shine super hard in single target environments, but that's always been one of the cases with her. She's an erudition character, but a Boot Hill will still be able to shine in that type of content, right? It just depends on the situation, but that's the way it's always been. So I don't feel like the meta shift or the meta change that's currently happening are necessarily going to make breaks non-viable going forward. It's just less viable, but that's always going to be the case with just about any meta that comes around. Eventually, it's not going to be as viable, but it doesn't make it non-useful somehow. And I know what you guys might be thinking. Power creep. It is a thing. It's a thing in the game now, right? And it definitely will affect breaks, but it's going to affect every meta. No meta is safe. No character is truly safe. Eventually, every single character is probably going to have some form of power creep exist with it. I mean, Acheron is still clearing almost a full year later at E0 S0. It's been proven beyond a reasonable doubt so many times. Maybe your Acheron's not clearing, but your Acheron might just not be like super duper well built. You might not have a super cracked team. That doesn't mean these characters can't still zero cycle the content because it's been shown. Go look it up for yourself. People are still zero cycling with the characters. Yeah, they might have super cracked teams, whatever. But my point is, just because power creep exists doesn't mean you can't still get the clear. Power creep is going to affect every meta, doesn't matter what meta it is, right? But if you put in that effort, you can still get the clear, even with a breaks team, even if it's not the intended meta for the content you're going up against. Now let's switch things up a bit here, okay? Because I've been glazing breaks so that you guys aren't too worried about it, in case you guys have heavily invested into it, okay? But I need to be transparent and honest here, okay? I've been saying since the get-go, basically a year ago before the break meta even started, that it is a niche meta. It's a niche meta that is not going to have as good of longevity going forward in most content. It's wiser and better to invest in certain characters and certain teams that tend to have more longevity. You will be able to clear more content more often with those type of teams, such as a Fei Xiao or an Acheron, who have an ultimate that basically says, I don't care what the meta is, y'all can do whatever the heck you want, I'm still gonna come out here, I'm still gonna clear, and I'm gonna do it convincingly. Yes, some of you that don't have a well-built Acheron or a strong Acheron team might not be clearing as easily as you used to, but that's natural. That happens after a while in any gacha game. Fei Xiao is a bit more of a recent release, so she's still clearing more convincingly than Acheron. She's a tier 0 character at the end of the day. But think about it, despite the fact that we're going into an AoE multi-target meta, Fei Xiao is still clearing convincingly despite being a primarily single-target character, right? That says a lot about the type of character that she is. And again, I can't believe I have to preface it so many times, but like, breaks are not going anywhere. You can still clear with your breaks characters. It's just not the best bang for your buck, okay? Think about how much time I spent glazing breaks up to this point, okay? I'm just pointing out facts, okay? The breaks meta is not the best investment of your Jade on your account, right? You want to pull good supports that are very strong and relatively universal. Pulling niche characters is fine, right? There are some niche characters that are like best in slot in certain cases, but it's also very, very good for your account to pull someone like Robin or Ron May, who like have an incredibly high amount of longevity and will help most teams on your account. And it's the same with DPS characters and sustains. Characters that are built to work in basically any content and still clear very convincingly are often referred to as OP, overpowered. They still clear no matter what the heck is going on. They have more longevity, okay? That's the point I'm getting at here. Characters like Huo still relevant to this day, still top tier, right? Characters like Robin, characters like Ron May, characters like Acheron, Fei Xiao, characters like Herta. Even Herta's going to have longevity going forward because of the way her ultimate works. Yes, once the content is not AoE based, she won't be as good, but she'll still be relevant considering just how good and well designed the character was. Characters that are designed to fit most situations will just have more longevity going forward, and when the meta shifts, they'll still be more relevant. Breaks, again, they're still relevant. They're not really going anywhere. As long as you have the right weakness type against the enemies, you should be totally fine. But it won't have as much longevity as some of the other metas in the game, right? That's always been the issue with breaks. But that's kind of like a double-edged sword, right? Because as long as you're a good enough player, an aware enough player, and you farmed out good enough relics, and you have good enough teams, it doesn't really matter what the meta does, because you are a well-aware enough player to still clear the content. I'm not bashing players here when I talk about this stuff, okay? Right? And I'm mostly speaking about casuals or less sweaty players when I talk about this stuff. Because a sweaty player doesn't even necessarily need advice, right? They can totally just like absolutely power down and run straight through enemies despite what's going on with good combat awareness, with good strategy. It's a turn-based strategy game, guys. And people sometimes forget about that. It's a strategy game, but it's Hoyoverse's fault for the most part, right? This used to be, at launch, a turn-based strategy game, and you used to mostly focus on what the enemies are doing and then sort of work around that. But pretty quickly, we all started focusing on our own personal damage and focusing on our teams, and we're all looking down at what our teams are doing rather than looking up at what the enemies are doing anymore. And that's Hoyoverse's fault for creating an environment that rewarded your own personal damage more than being combat aware. People don't even read the boss mechanics anymore because it has just been your own personal damage environment rather than focus down on what the enemy is doing and react to that. Anyways, this video has become a bit of a yap session, so I wanted to get this in there before we get too carried away here. This is some data that has been collected on Pridewin from a bunch of different communities, and it was recently updated today. It gets updated very regularly, and I wanted to show you guys some of the usage cases for different characters, etc., and, you know, the cycle clearing times. This is based on free light cones here. You can go to all light cones, which will include 5 stars, but we're going to keep it at free light cones just so things stay more reasonable. This is where most of the players will be playing, is this criteria right here. And it doesn't necessarily change this list in order that much. You see Argenti, surprisingly, has the the lowest cycle clearing, which means he's performing the best. Now, that's obviously very skewed data. The reason why he's so high is because not a lot of people even have him, right? And a lot of people only use him given the right situation. So he's going to be used by sweats or combat-aware players in very small amount of usage cases. Look at his usage percentage here. It's 0.37. That's incredibly low. you see him mostly getting used a lot right now because of the Herta. He's really strong on the Herta teams, especially if the enemy is physically weak. Doesn't even have to be, right? It's mostly about helping the Herta. He's more of a sub DPS or a alt DPS on this team, and she has almost a 15% usage case. And so only really good players or combat-aware players are using him on a very successful team. So every time that he gets used in those circumstances, they're typically clearing really quickly, right? So he has a faster clear time right now on this list. So I wanted to let you guys know about that in case you see certain characters here. This isn't tier listing for the characters. I just wanted to give you guys a little bit of data. So let's talk about some Breaks characters here. We have Rappa, still performing very well, and she's incredibly beast mode inside 1 of Memory of Chaos 12. Let's look at Firefly though, because you have to go kind of down low. Her usage case dropped a lot, bro. Her usage case was so much higher only like a week ago, but she doesn't have the juice for a lot of people's accounts, okay? If you have a strong Firefly or Firefly team, she's gonna have a bit more success, right? And so less players are having as much success with her because breaks are just not as strong in this particular Memory of Chaos. This Memory of Chaos is also just way more like difficult for a lot of people to clear, right? If you have the right teams, if you have good teams that help clear it, it's not that big of a deal, right? And when you go down to Boot Hill, where is Boot Hill even? Bro, Boot Hill is down here. 0.05% because a lot of people didn't even pull him. He's a guy, not all the guys get pulled that often. And a lot of people weren't expecting him to necessarily perform well, considering it's an AoE meta and he's single target. But he works really, really well when the enemies are physical weak. He's a monster when they are physically weak. So I wanted to show you guys this data. You can come take a look at this if you feel so inclined. It will be in the description. You see, Remembrance Trailblazer getting high usage because it's a free character and very, very strong, especially right now in the current meta. You see Ling Shaw getting a lot of usage case as well. These are the type of characters I was talking about where, where's Robin at? Robin's right here. You see a lot of high usage case for these characters that despite what the meta is, they still perform well no matter what. That's the point that I'm trying to make here with this video, is that despite breaks always having a place in the meta, that because it's a bit more niche of a meta, it is not as relevant in the lifespan of Honkai Star Rail as other metas will be, as other characters will be. Even when we get a new preservation character, you think Aventrian just all of a sudden going to come bad? No, he will still have relevancy. Look at Topaz, slightly less usage case, but she's an incredibly strong character, still a tier 0.5 character in Apocalyptic Shadow and Memory of Chaos. Anyways, this has been like the yap of the century of the week over here, right? But in short, breaks aren't going anywhere. It's becoming more niche, but it's not going to get more niche than it already is. And it's always been niche. It's that double-edged sword where it is more niche, but it will always have its usage cases given the right situations, right? Now leave some comments down below so we can discuss this a little bit further. Let me know what you think about the break meta situation, if you still enjoy it, if you've moved on, if you think it's going to have longevity going forward. And if you like this kind of stuff, consider leaving a like and subscribe, and I'll see you guys in the next one. Peace out.